When our parents died, my brother and I swore we'd never touch the land they left us, so coming home to find he'd built 20 storage units on it wasn't just betrayal, it was war. And he forgot I own a demolition company. The gravel crunched under my tires just like it always had, but the rest of it, everything else, was wrong. The trees were still there, a little taller maybe, but the quiet? Gone. Replaced by a low metallic hum from something too modern, too clean. I slowed the truck to a stop at the edge of the old property and stepped out into the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels guilty. 20 steel doors stared back at me in a perfect line. Identical units, bolted down, painted in fresh neutral gray like someone had tried to make them invisible. But all I could see was what they'd erased. My boots hit the ground, heavier than they should have. I walked slowly, fingers trailing along the edge of one unit, its skin still warm from the sun. The land beneath it used to hold wildflowers. My mother planted them, even after Dad said they'd never last through the summer heat. They did, every year. Now there was nothing but concrete slabs and aluminum siding, each door stamped with a crisp white number, like graves. I circled around, looking for signs, any hint that I was wrong, that this wasn't what it looked like. Maybe some construction tape, maybe a notice. Something that said this was temporary, a mistake. But there was nothing. Just 20 finished units, locked and ready for tenants. Like the whole thing had been here for years, and I was the one trespassing. Darren's truck was parked around the side, dust-free and angled like he expected company. My brother always had a way of dressing things up to look legitimate. He used to say presentation was everything. Guess that applied to betrayal, too. I hadn't seen him in nearly 7 months. Last we talked, I was flying out to Arizona for a teardown job, an old chemical plant slated for demo. 6 months in the desert. Long hours. No time for phone calls. But before I left, we stood right here, right on this land, and we talked about our parents. It was late. We were both tired, and we made the same promise we made the day we buried them. The land stays untouched. No development, no sale, no splitting it up. It was sacred ground, and we swore to leave it that way, a piece of them still breathing under the soil. Our one unbroken thing. Now it was gone. I looked down at my boots, at the gravel someone else had poured over our father's footprints. I felt the heat rise in my chest, slow and cold, not like a fire, but like steel grinding to life. I wasn't just upset. I wasn't just surprised. I was betrayed. And what Darren didn't know, what he clearly forgot while he laid concrete over our parents' memory, is that I don't just tear things down. I do it by the book. I do it clean, and I don't miss. It was raining the day we buried them, which felt wrong. Our mom hated the rain. She used to say it made the world feel too heavy, like even the sky couldn't carry its own weight. But that day, it was like the clouds had been waiting for permission to fall apart. Just like we were. The funeral was small, quiet. The kind of gathering where no one knows what to say, because anything worth saying had died at 30,000 feet. We stood there, Darren and I, shoulder to shoulder at the edge of that soaked cemetery grass, pretending to be men when we both still felt like kids. He gripped the folded flag in his hands, knuckles white, face unreadable. I just stared at the casket like I could will it open and undo the week we'd just lived through. The land came up after the service, not in some legal meeting, not with a will or an estate lawyer, just us, standing under the carport of the old house, listening to the rain hammer the tin roof, and trying to imagine life without the people who'd built it all. This place stays, I said, voice flat, final. We don't sell it. We don't change it. Darren nodded, didn't even hesitate. It's theirs, he said. We keep it that way. It wasn't dramatic, no handshake, no ceremony, just a pact born from grief and bone-deep respect. That land, our land, was more than dirt. It was the sweat on Dad's collar and the calluses on Mom's hands, the tool shed he built from salvaged pine, the cedar bench she stained every spring like it mattered, like someone would care. And we did. We both did. Or so I thought. We talked about maybe setting up a community garden someday, keeping the wildflowers going, letting kids from the neighborhood use the space to run around, like we used to. Nothing big, nothing commercial, just memory, preserved in place, like a living museum with no tour guides. That was the vow. And for a while, Darren kept it. He trimmed the fence line, cleared brush, even talked about rebuilding the old chicken coop just for show. He said it helped him feel closer to Dad, said it made things easier. I believed him. But time has a way of bending people, and distance can make you miss the cracks forming in someone else. I should have seen it sooner. The way he talked about passive income, how his texts got shorter, how he stopped mentioning the land altogether. The last time we were there together, he looked out at the empty lot and said, "It's kind of a waste, just sitting here." I laughed it off. Now I wish I hadn't. Because when someone breaks a promise to the dead, they're not just betraying the past, they're setting fire to everything that was supposed to live through them. He was already outside when I pulled up, like he'd been waiting, not nervously, not guilty, just ready. Leaning against his truck with that same easy smile he'd worn since we were kids, sneaking into the corner store for root beers. Except this time, I wasn't here to split a candy bar. I was here to ask why the hell he'd carved up our family's grave. "Hey man," he said, pushing off the tailgate like this was just another Saturday morning, and not the moment everything between us was about to split in half. "Didn't think you'd be back this early." I didn't answer right away. I walked past him, eyes on the row of storage units stretching across the old field. He followed me with that too casual pace, hands in his jacket pockets like we were taking a stroll through something we built together. "You've been busy," I said finally, my voice flat as the concrete he'd poured over our past. He laughed a little, soft, almost embarrassed. "Yeah, well, things kind of picked up. Demand's been nuts lately. Everyone wants space, but nobody has room." I turned and looked at him, really looked at him. Same eyes, same face, but something behind it was off. Too polished, like a cover-up on a bruise. "You built 20 units, Darren. On our land. The land we swore we'd never touch." He nodded, slowly. I know. But listen, it's temporary. Just while the market's hot. I kept everything clean. Nothing permanent. I was careful. Careful. That word made something twist in my stomach. My dad used to use it when talking about the garden hose. Darren used it while desecrating a promise. "You kept it clean?" I repeated. "You poured concrete. You cut down the crabapple tree. You ran power lines and installed security cams. But it's still ours, right?" He shifted, glanced at the units, then back at me. "Yeah, it is. I just thought, look, I didn't think you'd care. You've been gone, out doing your thing. It felt like I was taking care of it, putting it to use." "Putting it to use," I said, the words sour in my mouth. He held his hands up like he was trying to calm a wild animal. "It's still ours, man. We're still in this together. I just figured you'd get it. You of all people, you know how to build things, how to move forward." I looked at him, and all I could see was the plywood coffin our parents were lowered into. I remembered the dirt on my boots and the weight in my chest when we made that vow. And now here he was, standing on the promise we'd buried them with, smiling like it was a favor. "You didn't just build something, Darren," I said quietly. "You broke something." His face finally changed then, just a flicker, but enough to show he knew. And still, he said nothing. Because when your lie's been laid in concrete, there's no easy way to dig it out. There were things my dad said that I used to laugh at as a kid. Little phrases that didn't mean much until I was old enough to feel the weight behind them. Like when he called the land sacred. Not in some churchy way. He wasn't religious. He just meant it was ours. Untouchable. Something no one else could take or shape without permission from the ones who'd bled into it. He built the fence by hand when we were barely tall enough to see over it. Dug every post hole with a rusted auger that only worked when you leaned your whole body into it. He didn't cut corners. Said the land deserved better than that, so we measured everything twice, sometimes 3 times, just so it would last. That dirt holds our footprints, our fights, our repairs. I lost my first tooth swinging off the low branch of the sycamore tree by the west fence. Mom buried her garden gloves under the cedar when they finally wore through, said they'd earned retirement in good soil. That place wasn't just dirt. It was our family album, just without pages. After the plane crash, I couldn't bring myself to step foot on it for weeks. Darren was the one who convinced me to go back. We stood at the edge of the lot and just listened. Nothing moved. The wind slipped through the tall grass like it didn't want to be heard, and in that silence, we didn't cry or talk. We just remembered. That's why we made the promise, because the land was still breathing them in a way nothing else could. The house was gone, sold to cover medical bills before the end, the photos and furniture scattered. But this patch of earth, it was still ours, still whole. We owed them that much. Darren felt the same way back then, or at least he acted like he did. Said he heard Dad's voice every time he stepped on the gravel. Said the place helped him sleep, and maybe it did. Maybe, for a while, the promise was enough to keep him grounded. But greed doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in, poses as logic. Darren started asking quiet questions. Wouldn't it be better if the land could pay for itself? What if we put up just a small shed, just temporary? I shot it down every time. He'd always nod, say I was right. But now I see what he was really doing. Testing the lock, looking for the soft spot in the fence. That land was the last thing they trusted us with. Not just to own, but to protect. And Darren took that trust and sold it by the square foot. Painted numbers over it, locked it down. People think sacred means holy. But in our family, sacred just meant untouchable, until he touched it. And now, I couldn't unsee it. Couldn't unknow what he'd done. Couldn't unfeel the way it made me want to raze it all back to dirt, just to remember what it was. I didn't want to go to the county office. I wanted to believe, deep down, stubbornly, that there was still some part of this that made sense. That maybe Darren had gone about it the wrong way but stayed within some kind of boundary. Maybe he'd gotten a temporary variance, filed the permits under a shared clause, bent the rules without snapping them in half. I wanted that to be true, but wanting doesn't hold up in court. The clerk behind the zoning desk was a tired woman with reading glasses hanging halfway down her nose. I slid the parcel number across the counter and asked for any recent filings tied to the land. She sighed, tapped on her keyboard, then printed a stack of papers without a word. At first glance, it all looked surprisingly clean. Pages stamped, signatures in place, a tidy little package of approval for temporary multi-unit structures under shared ownership. But then I saw my name, twice. Once under the owner authorization field, and once beneath a note that read, "Property co-owner approved expansion verbally and via attached signature." Only I hadn't. I took the paper to the side counter, laid it flat, and studied the signature. It looked close. Same general flow, same first name, but it wasn't mine. Not even a good fake, just enough to fool someone who never expected fraud. My hand shook slightly as I pulled out my wallet and compared it to my license. The difference was obvious, if you were looking. The permit should have been dead on arrival. No meeting minutes. No verification. No adjacent parcel notifications. But somehow, it had slipped through. I flipped to the last page and saw it. Approval granted by a junior staffer. Probably overworked. Probably under pressure. Probably trusting that two brothers wouldn't fake their way through local government. I walked back to the clerk. Who reviewed this? She scanned the top sheet, squinted. Looks like it went through our expedited process, community development path. Based on this, I held up the fake signature. She adjusted her glasses, and when she finally saw it clearly, her face changed. That's not supposed to look like that. No, I said. It's not. She took the documents back from me slowly, like they might bite. You're saying this wasn't authorized? I'm saying someone forged my name, filed it without a hearing, and built 20 storage units on land they don't own. The room felt colder then, not just because of the fluorescent lights, but because the truth finally had a paper trail. I left with copies, 2 sets, one for my records, one for the lawyer I hadn't needed in years, until now. Darren didn't just go behind my back. He dragged my name through ink and bureaucracy and thought I'd never find out. But I did. And if he thought he'd buried this under signatures and stamps, he was about to learn what I do for a living. I dig. I found the flyer under my windshield wiper. At first, I thought it was another roofing ad or lost dog notice. But when I pulled it off and looked closer, I saw the glossy logo at the top, Pinegate Storage Solutions, followed by a tagline in bold. Safe, local, affordable. My stomach turned before I even hit the second line. Beneath that was an address. My address, or rather, our address, the land our parents left us. The one Darren had promised, just like I had, to leave untouched. Turns out temporary meant rented. The flyer offered monthly discounts, auto-pay enrollment, even premium climate-controlled units, which I knew for a fact were just regular steel boxes baking in the sun. It listed contact info too, including a business number and an email address. I called the number just to hear the voicemail. Darren's voice came through, softened and slightly deeper, like he was trying to sound more official than he was. Thanks for calling Pinegate Storage. Leave a message and one of our property managers will return your call shortly. Property managers. Plural. I didn't leave a message. I already knew where I was going. The registrar's office didn't take long. The LLC was real, at least on paper. Pinegate Storage Solutions LLC, registered 6 months ago. Mailing address, a P.O. box downtown. Owner of record? Not Darren, but someone named Blake Ryland. A name I'd never heard. Until I checked the emergency contact section and saw the number matched Darren's cell. Classic move. Create a shell name, lease the units under it, and keep yourself off the radar. Blake was probably a buddy. Or fake entirely. Either way, it was a firewall, and Darren thought it would hold. I drove straight to the property. Again. I parked at the back edge, near the line of brush that separated the units from the open field. I waited until someone pulled in, a guy in a gray van who unlocked Unit 7, rolled the door up, and started hauling out buckets and power tools like it was his own garage. I walked up, casual. Hey, how long you been renting here? He looked up, a little surprised. Oh, about 3 months now. Got a sweet deal through a friend of the owner. You know who owns it? He shrugged. Some guy named Blake, I think. But I talked to Darren when I moved in. He handles all the keys and stuff. Right, I said. Darren handles everything. I watched him pack up and drive off, and when the unit was closed again, I walked the length of them, counting door by door. Almost all of them had locks, new ones, some had stickers. Numbers scrawled in Sharpie. These weren't empty shells waiting to be used. They were full, rented, running. My brother hadn't just broken a promise. He'd built a business on stolen legacy and hoped I'd never notice. But I had, and I wasn't just noticing anymore. I was documenting. The letter was simple. 1 page, professional tone. No threats, no emotion, just facts. Typed in black ink on Titan Demolition Services letterhead, folded crisp, sealed in a plastic sleeve, and taped dead center on the first storage unit door. The metal was still warm from the sun when I pressed it flat, smoothing out the corners like I was hanging a family photo. In a way, I was. It read, "Cease and desist. Immediate removal required. Unauthorized construction on privately owned property. Violations of municipal zoning and forged authorization documents. 7 days. Signed, me." I took a step back, snapped a photo, time-stamped, documented, legal. Then I waited. It took him 2 hours to show up. I was sitting in my truck, engine off, watching the sun dip past the edge of the tree line when Darren's beat-up Tacoma pulled in like it owned the place. He parked sideways, crooked like always, the same way he used to park in high school when he wanted to make an entrance. He didn't even look surprised, just walked up to the unit, peeled the letter off the door, and read it like it was a joke someone slipped into a birthday card. Then he looked over at me and grinned. "You serious with this?" I didn't answer. I just watched. He waved the paper in the air like it meant less, because it was made of paper. "Come on, man. You don't have to get dramatic. It's storage, not a skyscraper." "No," I said, finally stepping out. "It's theft." "Jesus," he muttered, shaking his head. "Look, I get it. You're upset. You were gone for 6 months and things changed." I stepped up. "I kept the place active. It's not like I trashed it. You forged my signature, filed fake permits, built a business on our parents' land without a word." He held his hands up, smiling like it could still fix something. "But look how clean it is. Look how organized." And that's when it hit me. He thought that mattered, that the neatness of his lie made it easier to swallow. Like a polished casket didn't still hold a corpse. "You forget what I do for a living?" I asked, my voice low, level. "I tear down structures, all day, every day. Things bigger and stronger than this, buildings with better permits and deeper foundations." He said nothing. "I take things apart, Darren. Clean, legal, permanent. And I sleep just fine afterward." He laughed, nervous this time. "You're not really going to tear these down." 7 days, I said. "Then it's not your choice anymore." He started to speak, but I was already walking back to my truck. I didn't raise my voice, didn't throw a punch. I didn't need to, because the loudest sound in demolition doesn't come from the first hit. It comes from the silence right before it. It started with the looks. Not the usual waves and nods I'd grown up with, the kind that come from folks who watched you ride your first bike or knew your dad's coffee order better than you did. These were different, hesitant, quick to turn away. That kind of eye contact people make when they're not sure if you're about to say hello or set something on fire. The next thing I noticed was the change in tone. The cashier at the corner market, who used to ask how work was going, now just muttered, "Have a good one," without looking up. Mr. Callahan, who'd borrowed my post hole digger every spring since '08, suddenly couldn't remember my name. Darren was working fast, spinning a story, and I knew how good he was at that. He'd always been the smoother one, the charming one. He could lie with a straight face and a half smile and somehow make you feel like the bad guy for not believing him. Now he was putting those skills to work, door to door, backyard to backyard, painting himself as the responsible brother trying to keep the land useful, and me as the unhinged one who came back from a long job with a grudge and a wrecking crew. "He's just bitter," I overheard one woman whisper to another near the mailboxes. "Can't handle that his brother actually did something with the place." Someone else called me possessive, said I was trying to destroy the only thing left of our parents. That one hit harder than I expected. Not because it was true, because it was the exact opposite. They didn't know about the promise. They didn't know we stood on that land in the rain and vowed to preserve it, not profit from it. They only knew what Darren told them, that I was coming back to bulldoze a piece of family history out of spite. And people love a villain if you give them one with a good backstory. He even brought up my company, told folks I was dangerous, that I could snap if pushed, that Titan demolition wasn't just a job, it was a weapon, one I was itching to use. The irony wasn't lost on me. He turned my silence into aggression, my restraint into threat, and he did it without raising his voice, just like always, just enough suggestion to stir fear without facts. It worked, at least for a little while. And that's the thing about fear. It doesn't need truth to spread, just space. I could feel the neighborhood tightening around me, like I was the one who'd crossed a line. But what Darren didn't understand, what he never understood, was that I wasn't there to scare people. I was there to remind them what this land was, what it meant, what it had been promised to stay, and if that made me the villain in his story, then so be it, because I still had the receipts. I wasn't looking for it. I was just walking the back edge of the property, past where the grass had grown wild again, out where the storage units didn't quite reach, where the dirt still looked like home. The kind of place Dad used to call the quiet corner. It was where he went when he needed to think, when he was too angry to speak or too tired to pretend he wasn't. That's where I found it, half buried in brush and dead leaves, rusted at the edge, the wooden handle splintered down the middle like it had been stepped on and forgotten. I knelt down, pulled it free, and brushed off the dirt. It was Dad's shovel, old, solid, hand-worn from years of planting, digging, building. The same one he used the day we dug the first post hole for the fence. The same one we used to bury the family dog when I was 12. He used to say real tools had memory, said they carried the weight of what they'd been through and you could feel it in the handle if you paid attention. That shovel had blisters etched into it from decades of calloused hands, and now it had been left here, tossed aside like a broken branch. I stood there holding it, eyes on the storage units, lined up like strangers in a place they didn't belong. Concrete where there should have been garden beds, steel instead of soil, locks and numbers in place of names and stories. Darren told everyone he was honoring the space, keeping it alive, keeping it useful. But this shovel said otherwise. He hadn't preserved anything. He'd buried it, and not carefully, not with care or ceremony. He'd paved over what mattered and called it progress. I turned the shovel in my hands, ran my thumb over the crack in the handle. It wasn't sharp. It had been there a while, long enough for the wood to start darkening from moisture, which meant he knew. Darren had found this, seen it, and left it to rot, just like the promise we made. It wasn't about the land anymore, not really. It was about the memory of the people who gave it to us, about whether their legacy was worth anything more than a few $100 in monthly rent. He looked at this place and saw square footage. I looked at it and saw Sunday mornings, tool belts slung over tired shoulders, the smell of fresh-cut cedar. I looked at it and saw Dad walking the property line at sunset, one hand in his pocket, the other gripping the shovel like it meant something. Because it did. And now it meant something else entirely. It meant Darren didn't just forget our parents. He discarded them. I leaned the shovel against the fence post we'd put in together 20 years ago. It wobbled slightly, but held, for now. I met Danny in the back lot behind the firehouse. We used to volunteer together years ago, before life pulled us in different directions, him into inspections and code enforcement, me into demolition and dirt. He still had that same no-bull look on his face, like the kind of guy who could smell a lie from 30 feet and wouldn't bother pretending otherwise. He handed me a clipboard the second I stepped out of the truck. No greeting, just business. "You're not gonna like this," he said. On top was a complaint form. Then another, and another, all filed within the past 4 months, all referencing the same location, our land, filed by different people, neighbors, renters, even one anonymous tip. The complaints weren't small either. We're talking diesel fumes leaking into adjacent yards, generator hums at 2 a.m., faulty lighting circuits that tripped breakers 2 houses over. "Units 3 and 4, Danny muttered, pointing with the edge of his coffee cup. We went out after someone said they smelled gas. Found extension cords running through the walls, makeshift panels, definitely not up to code. I flipped to a photo. Black scorch marks along the base of one unit, an overloaded outlet, melted plastic. "You shut it down?" I asked. Danny shook his head. "We tried. Darren said it was a false report, claimed no one was renting them, said they were locked up and sealed. He even showed us a row of units with fresh locks. But," he tapped the next page, "each unit had a brand new padlock. Identical, same make, same model, except most of them weren't real. They were decoys, dummy locks, ones you could buy in bulk online. No internal mechanism, just for show." He slid a small bag from his pocket and handed it to me. Inside was a busted lock casing, cheap and hollow. "Found it in the dumpster behind the diner," he said. "Same brand, same fake security." I just stared at it, the plastic light in my hand. It didn't even weigh anything. Like the illusion of safety was enough for Darren to call it secure. "They weren't just storage units," Danny said. "They were workshops. Maybe even garages. Whatever's going on inside, it's more than just renting space." I nodded slowly, my eyes locked on the clipboard, the paperwork, the photos. It all clicked into place like a puzzle that had been missing its ugliest piece. Darren didn't just lie to me. He lied to the city, the fire department, the people living next door to a time bomb, and he built the whole thing with fake locks, fake names, and real risk. And yet, he still had the nerve to act like I was the problem. I handed Danny the bag back, jaw clenched. "I gave him 7 days," I said. "He's down to 4. Danny didn't smile. He just nodded. "Call me when the countdown's over." I already knew I would, because if Darren thought this was just about land, he'd forgotten the first rule of demolition. You always check for fire hazards before you light the fuse. He came by unannounced, just like he used to when we were younger, back when things were simple and the heaviest argument we had was over who got the last piece of pie. But there was nothing simple about this. I was sitting on the tailgate of my truck, watching the sun dip behind the tree line like it was trying to disappear before the real heat hit. The air smelled like dry grass and old memories. Darren pulled up without a word, engine humming before it cut out, door slamming like a gavel. He walked over slow, arms swinging like nothing was wrong. "You really gonna go through with it?" he asked, skipping pleasantries like we were already in the courtroom. I didn't answer at first. I just watched the sky lose color and waited for him to say what he really came to say. "You're being selfish, you know," he said finally. "You've always been like this, clinging to rules, to the past, to ghosts." That was the word that did it. Ghosts. I stood up, slow, calm. "You mean Mom and Dad?" He looked away, just slightly. "You think tearing this all down brings them back?" "No," I said. "I think leaving it alone would have kept part of them here." He laughed once, short and hollow. "You act like this land is sacred. It's dirt. It's wasted space. They're gone. You think they'd care if it was used for something useful?" "They cared enough to leave it to us," I said, "and we made a promise. Right there, after we lowered them into the ground." He shook his head like I was a child. "That promise was made in grief." You think Dad would have wanted it to sit untouched while we both scraped by? You think Mom would have said no to helping people store their stuff? No, I said, but I don't think she'd want you falsifying signatures, running power through illegal hookups, or lying to my face either. That one hit. He blinked, shifted his weight. You built something on top of their memory, Darren, I said, quieter now. And you didn't even tell me. You didn't ask. You just took it, like your name meant more than theirs. He looked down at the dirt, then up at the units, standing in their perfect line. He didn't say he was sorry, didn't try to explain. He just stood there in the fading light, looking at what he'd done like it was a mural only he could understand. Then he turned, didn't argue, didn't defend himself, just walked back to his truck and drove away, the gravel spitting behind his tires. And that silence. That was the moment I knew the brother I'd made that promise with wasn't the one standing across from me anymore. We rolled in just after sunrise. The air was still cool, still holding that early quiet before the world wakes up and remembers how noisy it is. I stood at the edge of the lot, boots planted in soil that felt older than me, watching the first rays stretch across the metal faces of Darren's units. They glinted like teeth. My crew didn't say much. They didn't have to. These were men I'd worked with for years, gritty, steady guys who knew the difference between demolition and destruction. When we showed up, we didn't come to make a mess. We came to clear one. The permits were in order. The city had reviewed the fake filings, confirmed the fraud, and handed me the green light with a raised eyebrow and a quiet, "Good luck." I didn't need luck. I needed fuel, steel, and timing. By 7:30, the excavator was running. The first unit came down cleaner than expected. Steel peeled away like paper, the whole structure folding under the hydraulic claw with a satisfying groan. The kind of sound that tells you something wrong is finally ending. Dust plumed into the air, golden in the morning light. I watched it collapse and felt nothing but a steady calm. Not joy, not rage, just something like gravity pulling everything back where it belonged. One by one, the others followed. My guys worked with precision, methodical, deliberate. They didn't ask questions about who built these or why they were coming down. They trusted the paperwork, the signature, and the look in my eyes when I handed them their assignments. Neighbors started to gather, first behind windows, then slowly creeping to sidewalks and porch steps, cups of coffee cradled like shields. Some watched in silence. A few whispered. One woman crossed her arms and nodded, like she'd been waiting for this longer than I had. By mid-morning, half the units were down. Exposed walls revealed nothing inside but empty shelves and dust. A few had tarps, plastic containers, a forgotten power strip dangling like an afterthought. No memories, no care. Just space for sale. Darren didn't show. I thought maybe he'd come storming in, hands waving, voice raised, demanding explanations he already knew. But he didn't. Maybe he knew this was bigger than noise now. Maybe he finally understood there's a difference between building something and taking something that never belonged to you in the first place. As Unit 12 crumpled, I saw a neighbor walk over and place a hand on the old cedar fence post, one of the few things left from when Dad built this lot by hand. She didn't say anything, just stood there and looked. Then she turned and walked away. By noon, the last steel wall hit the ground, and in its place wasn't just cleared space. It was the truth, in open air and honest light. Everything Darren had built, without permission, without honor, without me, was now scrap. And I finally felt like I could breathe again. We were halfway through tearing down Unit 13 when my foreman flagged me over. He didn't yell, just waved, a short motion. Subtle. But I knew that look on his face, cautious, serious, the kind of look you wear when something's not just off, it's wrong. The wall had already been peeled back, one of the side panels lying like a crumpled soda can in the dirt. But inside wasn't just dust and shelving like the others. This one was different. Tucked under the floorboards, false flooring, maybe a half-inch thick, was a hidden space. And inside that space were crates, industrial ones, stacked, sealed, and marked with coded shipping stickers. I dropped down and cracked one open. Inside, tools. Not just everyday hardware store stuff, high-end construction gear, laser levels, thermal cameras, portable welding kits, still in shrink wrap, still with theft deterrent tags attached, the kind you only get if something never went through a register. Another crate held electronics, boxes of tablets, routers, even high-end car diagnostics kits, thousands of dollars worth, all packed neat, like someone expected to move them fast. No invoices, no receipts, no serial numbers worth anything. "Where'd this come from?" my guy asked quietly, already knowing the answer. I didn't say anything. I just opened another crate. Empty, except for a piece of folded cardboard with the name of a supposed vendor. Westbridge Holdings, LLC. Never heard of them. I stepped outside the unit and called Danny, the fire marshal. Told him we had a situation. By the time he arrived, I'd opened 4 more units, each one with its own hidden stash. Some had supplies. Others were cleaned out, swept like someone had come in the night before and grabbed what they could. Whatever this was, Darren had been moving product. A lot of it. Quietly. Illegally. Danny walked the site with his clipboard, snapping photos, shaking his head. "These aren't just storage units," he muttered. "This is a front. A warehouse for stolen goods." "How long do you think it's been going on?" I asked. He shrugged. "Long enough to know how to hide it, but not smart enough to stay hidden." I stood there, staring into the shadows of the gutted units. I kept thinking about the day Darren told me it was temporary, that he was just making use of the land, that it was still ours. But this wasn't ours. This wasn't family. This wasn't legacy. This was a lie wrapped in sheet metal and sealed with locks meant to keep the truth from leaking out. He hadn't just broken our parents' trust. He broke the law. And suddenly, this wasn't just a story about a broken promise anymore. It was about something far worse. The moment when blood doesn't mean brotherhood, and truth becomes something you dig up from under a floor. The rain came down slow at first. Just a soft whisper on the hood of my truck, the kind that barely darkens the pavement but somehow soaks through your clothes anyway. I sat there, parked across from the lot, watching the last of the units lie broken and flat like steel tombstones. The land looked almost clean again, honest, like it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Then the cruiser rolled up. No sirens, no drama, just the crunch of tires over gravel and the sweep of headlights across what used to be a lie Darren built from concrete and cowardice. 2 deputies stepped out, raincoats half-zipped, hats pulled low. One of them looked over and gave me a short nod. The kind that doesn't need words. I nodded back. Darren came out a minute later. He must have seen the lights from inside wherever he was holed up, probably still telling himself it was just a misunderstanding, something he could explain away with that smooth voice and that well-practiced charm. But when he stepped into the rain and saw the cuffs, the badge, the binder of photos and inventory reports, the truth hit him like thunder. He didn't run, didn't raise his voice, didn't even ask what this was about. He just stood there in the rain, shoulders drawn in slightly, not from the cold, but from whatever weight finally settled on him. Like the story he'd written in fake permits and shell companies had finally reached its last page, and even he didn't believe the ending anymore. One of the deputies read him his rights. The other slipped the cuffs on, slow, like they were giving him a chance to speak. He didn't. I stepped out of the truck, kept my distance. He saw me, but he didn't say my name. Didn't call out, just stared past me, at the lot, at the mud where our dad once tilled the soil by hand, at the cedar stump where Mom used to sit and hum old gospel songs to herself when she thought no one could hear. And now it was just dirt again. No steel boxes, no locks. Just the sound of rain hitting the ground where memory used to grow. For a moment I thought maybe he'd cry. But Darren never cried, not even when they closed our parents' casket. His face didn't crack. It just emptied. Like the dream he'd built, the one with money coming in quiet and clean, no questions asked, had finally dissolved in the downpour. As they put him in the cruiser, he looked up at me one last time. No hate, no apology, just the look of a man who finally realized the thing he'd been building was never his to begin with. The door shut, the rain kept falling, and for the first time since I'd come home, the lot was silent. Not broken, not buried, just ready. The first time I walked the lot after Darren was gone, the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. No more metal groaning under wind, no fake padlocks gleaming like lies in the sun. Just open space, raw and honest. The land finally looked like itself again. Not like what someone wanted to make of it. I stood there with my boots in the dirt, the way Dad used to, hands on my hips, head low. The air still held the scent of rain and sawdust from demolition week. The soil was torn, but it was breathing again. It didn't need punishment. It needed healing. I didn't want to build anything at first, thought maybe I'd just leave it empty, let it be what it was. But that wasn't right either. This place was never meant to be forgotten. Our parents didn't pour their lives into it just to have it become a cautionary tale. So I rebuilt, not with concrete, not with contracts or codes, with care. It started with the bench. I used reclaimed wood from the old shed, planks my dad once cut with his bare hands, sanded them smooth, sealed them against weather, and carved their names into the backrest. Not big, not flashy, just real. Mom and Dad, side by side, watching the land they loved. Then came the plaque. Nothing grand, just a line of brass that read, promised, protected, remembered. Set in stone by the edge of the wild flowers that Mom used to plant every spring. I scattered some seeds there too, her favorites, purple coneflowers, daisies, little bits of color that didn't ask for attention, but made the world better just by blooming. I added a garden bed next, in the corner where the sun stayed longest. Mulch, a few raised boxes, a couple tomato starters. My crew helped out on weekends, donating soil, compost, elbow grease. Not one of them asked for pay. They knew this wasn't about money. This was about restoration. I didn't rebuild to erase Darren. I didn't plant flowers to bury what happened. I did it because I had to remind this land what it felt like to be honored, to be held in hands that weren't just looking to flip a profit or hide a secret. And slowly, it started to come back. Kids wandered in after school, curious. An old neighbor brought by a watering can and left it leaning by the fence post like she used to. People started waving again, stopping to talk, asking about planting days and volunteer weekends, like they finally saw the land for what it was supposed to be, not a transaction, but a memory that could still grow. I didn't get even. I got right. And in the end, that was the only kind of justice that ever lasts. We poured the foundation on a Monday morning, no fanfare, no speeches, just the hum of mixers and the scrape of shovels as volunteers lined the trench with rebar and hope. The sky was clear, the air still damp from the night before, and for the first time in months, the lot didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like a beginning. The shelter wasn't big, just a single-story structure with an open floor plan, high windows for light, and wide doors so no one would ever feel shut out. A place for warmth in winter, shade in summer. A place to gather, to rest, to be. Not for profit, not for show, but for community, the kind our parents would have wanted to see flourish on this land. We'd drawn the blueprints ourselves, me, an old neighbor who used to teach shop class, and a retired architect who hadn't picked up a pencil in years until I knocked on her door. Every angle, every nail, every line on those plans had fingerprints on it. Real hands, real sweat, real people. When the cement truck rolled in, I pulled a small copper penny from my pocket. It had been sitting there all morning, warm from my hand, edges worn smooth with age. 1952, the year my dad was born. The year my dad was... He used to tell us that real legacy doesn't shout. It settles, it roots, it stays under your feet long after the names are forgotten. So when the first batch of concrete hit the trench, I knelt down by the corner post, pressed that penny into the wet mix, and held it there for just a second. Just long enough to feel the weight of it. Not the coin, the promise. My foreman saw me do it, didn't ask, just nodded. That's how you know something's sacred. Not when you explain it, but when people just feel it. The concrete spread smooth, like butter across fresh bread, gray and thick, swallowing the penny whole. By the time the forms were pulled later that day, it was gone, invisible, buried. And that's exactly where it needed to be. Because legacy doesn't hang on plaques or sit in storage units. It doesn't scream from rooftops or hide behind LLCs. Legacy is one penny pressed into the foundation of something meant to outlast you. It's hands working side by side, not because they have to, but because they want to. It's neighbors planting a garden where lies used to grow. It's a bench that doesn't belong to anyone, and yet belongs to everyone. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the curing foundation, I stood at the edge of it all, boots in dirt, heart finally quiet. This wasn't about revenge. It was about repair. And under that concrete, beneath the beams and walls and future potlucks, there was a single copper coin resting in the soil. A reminder that we kept the promise, that we rebuilt what mattered, and that what was sacred stayed sacred.